l'chaim, l'chaim v'lebracha, l'chaim, l'chaim v'lebracha, l'chaim v'lebracha, l'chaim v'lebracha, l'chaim v'lebracha, l'chaim v'lebracha, l'chaim, 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 Rabbi, l'chaim v'lebracha, l'chaim v'lebracha, l'chaim v'lebracha. I want to talk about a different idea, which is very big by the Rebbe. And that is the inyan of Minhagim. The inyan of Minhagim. If you have the Sefer Minhagim Chabad, it says in the front that it was made by Rabbi Leibel Groner and Rabbi Nachum Zev Levi Gringlas. They made the Sefer HaMinhagim. It's 95% the Rebbe. They simply put it together. We know now from the Rishimis which are published that the Rebbe watched the Frierdiker Rebbe's Anhoga. The Rebbe watched how the Frierdiker Rebbe behaved, and in the Lashon Harav, any minig sheyesh b'chidush he wrote down. Any time he saw by the previous Rebbe a minig Anhoga, which was unusual, he wrote down. I mean, just a simple example. You open up any of the Bava Shesidah, it's only a question of where you find it. You have a page of minig Chabad when it comes to Haftarahs. Which Haftarah you read every Shabbos? I mean, this, even b'Shalach, there's many Minhagim. Not everybody reads the whole thing. The Rebbe compiled it, put it into the Siddur, like it's no big deal. How did the Rebbe collect it? How did the Rebbe know? He was by the Frierdiker Rebbe. And any time the Frierdiker Rebbe did a Haftarah which was different, the Rebbe wrote down, that became in Chabad. And of course, I'm sure you're aware, the mashal, when you have a special Shabbos, like Chanukah, or Pasha Shkol and Pasha Chodesh, and it's also Reish Chodesh. So the minig is that you say the Haftarah, the last Haftarah, right? The way Haftarahs work is it's Tadeh v'she'eni Tadeh Kodim. If you have 2 Kriyas or 3 Kriyas, you do the regular Kriya first, the Kriya, let's say, every Reish Chodesh, which is 12 times a year, second, and the Kriya, which is only once a year, like Shabbos Chanukah, Shabbos Shkolim, Shabbos Chodesh, third. But the Haftarah is the last one. Haftarah is always the last. But if it's also Reish Chodesh, you add Hashemayim Kissi, first and last pasuk, which ends up becoming 4 psukim, because the last pasuk in Yeshaya is Dita de Yishmak. So you read again, Vezero, V'yotu, pick Hashemayim, and then you say again the pasuk before. Read the pasuk Friya V'yetis. It's a Friya V'chapos. Yeah, so you read it twice. Read 4 psuk. If it's also Macha Chedesh, in other words, if Rosh Chodesh is Shabbos and Sunday, so you read the first pasuk. All of these Minhagim the Rebbe compiled. He watched the Frierdiker Rebbe. Of course, the Rebbe knew how to look. You need to watch the Rebbe's Minhagim. The guys make up Minhagim by the Rebbe every day. Why? The Rebbe scratched his head. Oh, there's a new minute, you got to scratch your head. Not for saying, you have to know what you're looking at, you know. I heard from people that the Rebbe would stand the whole davening and stare at the Frierdiker Rebbe the whole time. And the Rebbe once complained by Farbrengen. I remember the Farbrengen. Mistake to cooked off a bus of a And I was a little boy, I was probably 16, but I remember thinking, I don't think it's exactly a bus of a dam. But as I got older, I understood it's not the pshat who you're looking at, it's how you're looking. When the Rebbe looked at the Frierdiker Rebbe looking at a lakus. When we look at the Rebbe is the same Rebbe, but our eyes, we cooked a bus of a dam. Shana Sefer. This is a good advertisement, but this is a Maimed HaMuzga, but it's a good advertisement. There was a Tomim in Lubavitch who was God. I have to get back to my point, but this is a Maimed HaMuzga. I'm going to get back to Minhagim B'li Neder, and you'll help me. Sean Ferguson. There was a Tomim in Lubavitch who was from the Greisa Mashpiyim, who was a Bal Yisurim Adirim. His life was a nightmare. His name was Rabbi Alter Simchovich. Rabbi Alter Simchovich. Rabbi Alter Simchovich married Rabbi Zalman Havlin's daughter in Tafresh Ayin Vav, 1916. He walked out of the Rebbe Rashab excited because Rabbi Zalman was his mashpia. Zalman was a very big chassid. and he sees the Friedrich Rebbe, he steht in a gedruckte na Sefer. In other words, this Lashon Hara is a gedruckte. Whether it should or shouldn't be printed, the meist a gedruckte. He runs over to the Friedrich Rebbe, who was then the son of the Rebbe, the Paltiel. Excitedly, ich bin nachhossen, ich has noch mit der Tochter von Maschpier meine. And the Friedrich Rebbe says to him, what darfst du das? Why do you want to do that? It was like the worst thing anybody could have said. But the Friedrich Rebbe like poured water on him. She died, I think, in Pevov. Yeah. She lived together 10 years. She died young. 3 girls, none of them were from, you know that? None of them were from. Sie gewähren, ich habe vergessen den Namen. The Tmimim haben stark mit Charakter. They tried very hard. But from the Alten Chavach gar nicht geblieben. But he was such a big chassid. He was such a big chassid of Alten Chavach. His whole life was Yisurim. He passed away Tzadik Tes. He was 44. He was born in Hay. The ganze Leben Yisurim, gewähren gelitten von alle Seiten. He was a very big chassid. Rabbi Fuchs told me, one of the times I met him on the street, he told me 2 stories about the Paltiel. Mistamba was on 2 different occasions. One time he told me that there was a Farbrengen in a Tzvatsk, the Farbrengen in a Tzvatsk, and a Yid says to the Friedrich Rebbe that he's going to Israel. He's going to Israel. So the Friedrich was first in Israel. So the Rebbe says, do you in Yerushalayim? You're going to be in Yerushalayim? He says, yeah. So in the Farbrengen, he says to him, go into this and this street, and he gives him the address. Dem and dem gas, dem and das. Geh dort na rein, wirst du treffen a Jiden, was heißt Alter. Gib ihm von mir a Gris. Go to Yerushalayim, go to this street, this address, give him a number. You're going to meet a Jew whose name is Alter. Send him regards from me. This is one sipur. The zweite sipur everybody knows already. So bewusster mais, it's a gedruckter mais. That there was once a Farbrengen in Tzvatsk. Rabbi Alter Simchovich was a mashpia in Poland. The Temch Tvimim. He had to leave Poland because he had tuberculosis. And he couldn't take the cold weather. So he moved to Israel because it was warmer. At some point, Friedrich Rebbe asked him to come back to Poland and to be a mashpia in Temch Tvimim. He did it for a couple of years and then he went back to Israel again. But it was gehakt etzaros. The second story is famous that there was once a Farbrengen and somebody mentioned his name. Someone mentioned Rabbi Alter Simchovich. And the Friedrich Rebbe says, Alter! Alter, he took his holy hand and he put it on his chest. Alter is mine. Alter is mine. So some chachamatik, some smart guy, said to the Friedrich Rebbe, wir sind alle dem Rebbes. We're all the Rebbes. He said, yeah, ihr seid alle meine. Aber Alter, he put his hand on his chest a second time. Alter is mine. Like, don't tell me how to run my show. Yeah, you're all. Alter is mine. Rabbi Alter Simchovich. Rabbi Alter Simchovich was a mashpia in Yerushalayim. You know anything about Yerushalayim? I don't know if it's still true, but I know such people. They're very frum. They're very precise. But they're cold like dead fish. It's amazing. It's amazing. When you meet a genuine Yerushalmi, they're very religious. They get up on time, they daven vasikin, they learn a lot of shurim, but there's no life in them. How do you do that? And Rabbi Alter was a Russian chassid. Forgive me for saying the word, bad words.
We live in Yerushalayim. It's still like.
If I state this, they're pushing very ehrlich. They're very oizgid. But I don't know, they have no Yetzirah, so they have no Yetzirah. It's like, do whatever, and do tshuva, for heaven's sake, leb. It's an interesting phenomenon. Rabbi Alter was a mashpia in Yerushalayim. And he was going out of his mind. He would sit, he would drink a lot of mashke. He wasn't allowed. He would sit with the Bacham all night, and Fatog, they would go to the Kaisel. The whole Farbrengen went out by the Kaisel. Everything that he put in. So I want to say this. This is an advertisement.
You have to say it for Losh Rab.
No.
You sitzt die ganze Nacht mit dem Bacham und euch gepischt aus beim
Kaisel.
Beim Wahn.
Es war Schnaraf?
Yeah. That's Alter himself.
Rabbi Alter. But the word is Rabbi Alter Simchovich, I read his biography, and it's just not fair. It's Kula Yisurim. His life was so hard. They published a few years ago, Mr. You saw it, I have it, his Ha'aras on Tanya. He has notes on the whole Tanya. Rubei Kekule, it's Mara Makamis. He shows you where you have all over Chassidus, the sugis you have in Tanya. He was a deep Chabadnik. He had a brain like you have no idea. You read his writing, his notes, and you see how pashat he was. He was a brilliant intellectual. He's like a kop, a starke kop, incredibly great, powerful mind. But he was a real chassid. So in 2012, Tafshinayim Beis, it was the 100th anniversary of the yeshiva's Teres Emes. So Rabbi Shia Yuzevich, who was living forever, Chaim Nitzchi B'Lihevsik, he missed a stop, he's going around round 3, published a book. It's incredible. The Rabbi Shia Yuzevich published a book called Teres Emes. It's a very boring. It's a book of the yeshiva, who cares, you know? But in the middle of the book, there's 200 pages on Rabbi. You have to understand, Rabbi does not have a single from relative. Who's going to write his biography? And you need to read his biography. I'm Pashat making an advertisement. Get a hold of this book, Teres Emes. Don't read about the yeshiva, just read about. He was such a chassid. And his life was, it's just, he can't imagine. Wie viel Yisurim kann a Yid leiden? How much can a man suffer? His wife died. He had 3 Yisayimim. He suffered from illnesses. He was, and he gelitten von der Schwager, he gelitten von der gefährlich. His life was so hard. He was a makusher, he was a chassid of the Frierdiker Rebbe's. So the story that I wanted to share was, in 1929, the Rebbe Rayatz came to Yisrael. In 1929, the previous Rebbe was there for 3 weeks, and Rabbi Alter was living in Yisrael at the time. So he ran after the Frierdiker like a puppy. The whole 3 weeks, he forgot about his job, forgot about the yeshiva. Knuckle off the Rebbe. He followed the Rebbe around. Motzah Tisha B'Av, the Frierdiker Rebbe came to Teres Emes up Fastenzach. He came to the dining room of the yeshiva, and he broke his fast with the bach. Imagine that. In the middle of the night, he went up on the roof of the yeshiva, and he said a Maimar Chassidus, which is printed. I think it's Turim Menei Shamana. It's a Maimar Yiddish, my favorite Maimar. And the Frierdiker Rebbe sat with the Teres Emes boys for hours. I don't know how many. We sat with them, Motzah Tisha B'Av. When they left, Rabbi Alter continued the Farbrengen. Now you must understand. I mean, zwischen sie sind gewesen, als solche Jiden, wie Rabbi Koyen, wie die heißen, was sie gewinnt später in Chabad. Nu, Shalom's father.
Yeah.
And Meishe Weber. I mean, Teres Emes produced Chabadniks. But it was a hard sell, Yerushalayim. It's a kus b'pshitas, aber nicht kein lebendig alakus. It's so hard to fathom. They're so religious, they're so precise, and they're so unalive. So Rabbi Alter was sitting with the Bacharim, and he was trying to make them appreciate what it means that they just spent 4 hours in the Rebbe's presence. Now you understand, if they come to Farbrengen, there's 5,000 people. Oh, you mad with the Rebbe. But if Farbrengen, there's 25 people. You understand? That's what it was. It was 25 people. So the ability for these boys to appreciate that they were in the Rebbe's presence was diminished by the fact that it wasn't 770 in Tafshin Nun. It was 770 Tafshin Yud Beis. It was 20 guys. Anyway, the Rebbe left. The Frierdiker Rebbe left. And Rabbi Alter was Farbrengen with the Bacharim. And he had such a hard time. He would drink unashir. He was not allowed. He needed mashke to Farbrengen. He was a big chassid, he was a big oivid, he was a pnimis dekayid. But he needed mashke to Farbrengen. He took a lot of mashke. And he's screaming at these Bacharim. Was hat gesehen? Anoz hat gesehen? Elakus hat gesehen? This is what he was saying to the boys. What did you just see? You saw a nose, you saw a class that upon him, you saw a parsha, you saw godliness. He wanted so much that his students should feel about the Rebbe the way he felt. And it was very frustrating to him that they were not sensitive. They were not sensitive. They were boys. They were boys. They were kids. Okay, so not a problem. But the etzeminian, they were young. They were young. They were young. And he wanted that they should feel what he felt. And the whole Farbrengen was, this was his Farbrengen. This was his Farbrengen. Anyway, all of this is a Maimer Amuzga. I didn't mean to talk about this. What I wanted to talk about was Minhagim. The Rebbe watched the Frierdiker Rebbe. And whatever he saw, he wrote down. The Rebbe had a journal, as you know. And after Gimel Tammuz, the journal was published. The journal is called Rishimas HaYuman. There's the Rishimas of the Rebbe, which is Torah, which is all kinds of essays that the Rebbe wrote for all kinds of reasons. But there's also a volume which is called Rishimas HaYuman, which means the Rishima of the Rebbe's journal. The Rebbe didn't keep a journal where he writes, I had cornflakes for breakfast, The Frierdiker Rebbe kept such a journal. He literally has an account of his life day by day. The previous Rebbe, as a young boy, decided to write a lot. I don't know if you know the Sichos in Sefer HaMaimorim Tovshin Yud Aleph. There's a Rishima where the Frierdiker Rebbe says to his father, this is another Maimer Amuzgin, the Rebbe Rashab, I want you to get me a Malamed who should teach me how to write. Teach me how to write Hebrew. And the Rebbe Rashab was very bothered by that request. He says, you'll learn Torah, you'll learn from learning how to write. And the Rebbe says, no, I want someone to teach me how to write. He was 11 years old. And this went on for months. The previous Rebbe is asking for his father to get him a tutor, to teach him Hebrew, Lashon Kodesh, Ivrit, whatever you want to call it. And the Rebbe Rashab was not enamored with the idea. It was a modern idea, And the Rebbe Rashab, it's zugestanden. So the Rebbe Rashab finally conceded. He hired Rabbi Yamin the Malamed, Rabbi Yamin the tutor. But there was a condition. The condition is he'll teach you how to write, but he's going to verher you in Mishnayos Baal Peh. Rabbi Yamin the Malamed. And as a child, this Rabbi Yamin the Malamed taught the Frierdiker Rebbe how to write. Frierdiker Rebbe was a brilliant writer. Ask people who understand writing. The Frierdiker Rebbe wrote not like a Rebbe, he wrote like a writer. Rabbi Yamin the Malamed taught him how to write. The Chagav, there's a whole Rishima for the Frierdiker. It's printed in Tafshin Yaf, my mother. The Rishima ends that in 1930, Tafresh Tzaddik, the Frierdiker Rebbe was in Worcester. I was in Worcester. You go into the yeshiva in Worcester, and on the wall in the Beis HaMedrash, there's a plaque for Rabbi Yamin the Malamed. Rabbi Yamin the Malamed lived in Worcester. And I don't know if someone paid for it. There's a plaque. The Frierdiker was in Worcester, and Reb Chatzeh Fegen, Olav Shalom, Zechein Lebracha, walks into the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he says to the Frierdiker Rebbe, there's a man outside who says you know him. And the door opens, and in walks Rabbi Yamin the Malamed. The Rebbe hadn't seen him in close to 40 years. Tafresh Nun Beis, Tafresh Tzaddik, Kamat 40 Yor. And the Rebbe recognized him. And the Rebbe wrote a whole Rishima, the Frierdiker wrote a whole Rishima about this learning how to write. And that's how it finishes. It finishes with this word that he met, I'll tell you Ma'aseh Derech Hagav. I want to get back to the Minhagim, but I want to tell you Derech Hagav. Also from Rabbi Fuchs, I'm so Makeh Toiva. Who? I don't remember. Rabbi Yamin the Malamed, that heißt Kann sein, ich weiß nicht. Rabbi Fuchs told me a Ma'aseh. Rabbi Fuchs came from the Stadt Disna. In Lubavitch we know Disna because there was Shilim. Shilim Kuratin was called Shilim Disna. He came from Disna. Disna was a little village outside of Vilna in Lithuania. And Rabbi Fuchs was born in Disna. When he was a child, he went to Cheder in Disna. He had an old Malamed, I think his name was Reb Chaim. I wrote the story down. So I wrote down the name. But I think his name was Reb Chaim. When Rabbi Fuchs learned by Reb Chaim the Malamed from Disney, he was an old man. This Reb Chaim Disney was a Kopester. Chabad, but not Lubavitch. Kopist.
Kopist comes from Chabad.
Kopist is Chabad,
Yeah.
but it's not Lubavitch.
Yeah.
There was a lot of politics
Yeah.
in the Rishimish et Azach Zach.
When Pirish said when we went to Yerushalayim, he didn't go to the Tzemach Tzedek shul.
Because it was Kopist.
Excuse me, the Baal Tanya shul, because it's Kopist.
Kopist. So anyway, this Reb Chaim was a Kopist Chassid. In 1884, 1885, he was a young man, and the Kopist Rebbe, who was the Rebbe Rashab's cousin, who was older than the Rebbe Marash, sent him as a shliach to Lubavitch to the Rebbe Rashab. So he comes to Lubavitch, and a little boy is running around in the chutzner. So he asks people, who's this little boy? And they tell him, this is the Rebbe's son, this is the Rebbe's only son, Frierdiker Rebbe. So he goes over to the Frierdiker Rebbe, who was 4 or 5 years old. He says, Shalom Aleichem. Ich bin Chaim. I could be wrong about the name, but the story is from Rabbi Fuchs. He knew this man. Ich bin Chaim, the Melamed von Disney. Sorry. Fast forward 50 years. The Kopist Rebbe had passed away. The Kopist Rebbe's brother, Rabbi Shlomo had passed away. The Kopist's other brother, Rabbi also passed away. It's the Geblib Mana Rebbe. He was a Kopist, the Kopist and the Lubavitch didn't like each other, but he had no Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe came to Vilna. This is the early 30s. And the beginning of the story is 1880s. Almost 50 years. The Frierdiker Rebbe is in Vilna. And this Kopist the Chassid says to himself, I don't have a Rebbe. I'm going to hold on to old grudges, old politics. When am I going to have an opportunity? So he decides to break his ego and go to see the Frierdiker Rebbe in Vilna. Remember, Rabbi Fuchs learned by him. Rabbi Fuchs knew the story because he experienced it. So he travels to Vilna, was an old man. Travels to Vilna, and he walks in, he made an appointment, the mosquitoes. He walks into the Rebbe's room, and as soon as he walks across the threshold, the Frierdiker Rebbe stands up. Shalom Aleichem, Reb Chaim, the Melamed von Disney. The Frierdiker Rebbe met him when he was 4. And he introduced himself. So almost 50 years later, he walks in, and as soon as he walks across the threshold, the Frierdiker Rebbe stands up. Shalom Aleichem, Reb Chaim, the Melamed von Disney. Gewaldig. It's gewaldig. Anyway, I want to get back to my topic. That's the Muslim. I said, out by Moram Musger. Yeah. The topic. It's always going to schreiben. Okay, to get back in them. But then he met him in New Haven. So please tell me, ich English.
No, you start saying.
So he walked in, and the Rebbe recognized him, and they reminisced about the time, some 37, 38 years before, that he taught him how to write. That's all. I don't know if you know the stories. The Rebbe Rayat could chazer a Seder Mishnayos in 50 minutes. A Seder. The Frierdiker Rebbe, his Chinuch HaDibur, was so sharp, he could chazer a Seder Mishnayos in 50 minutes. Not a Mesichta, a Seder, 1 second. So they had competitions. But Alter Chassidim, it's all in the Rishima. You asked about the Rishima. An old Chassid who was Bokeh Mishnayos Baal Peh, and the Rebbe Rashab Teferet, auf Eisen wenig, with a stopwatch. The Frierdiker Rebbe was a 12-year-old. The other guy was an old chassid, and he did it 3 minutes faster. The Klorkeit, the Frierdiker Rebbe, this is in the Rishima. Ich hatte Mishnayos Baal Peh, a Seder Mishnayos, weniger wie a Shotzeit. The Rebbe Rashab sat with a stopwatch. Okay, that's not important. What's important is Minhagim. The Rebbe, our Rebbe Gesund sein, used to watch the Frierdiker Rebbe. And any time he saw a minhag, which was a chiddush, and of course the Rebbe versteht a chiddush, the Rebbe wrote it down. It goes further, that sometime with the Frierdiker Rebbe there was changes. So in the Rishimis, so you have in 1933 Tafresh Tzaddik Gimel, the Rebbe writes, the Rebbe did this, and then on the side of the page the Rebbe wrote, Tafrei, at the same page, Tafrei Tzadik Zayin, 1937, the minhag changed. The Rebbe followed the Friedrich Rebbe's Minhagim. He wrote them all down. Now, if you know the history of Chabad, you know that there was a rule. The Rabbeim have nicht gebissen in the Gabos. Meaning, what happened in the Lubavitcher Shul, in Lubavitch, where the Rebbe David was not necessarily minhag Chabad. That was the Gabbai. Because the Rebbe Rashab did not necessarily say what the custom was. To know the customs, you had the Rebbe to tell you. And of course, over the 7 generations of Chassidus Chabad, the Rabbeim revealed to various Chassidim certain Minhagim. But nobody knew all the Minhagim. This one knew this minhag, this one knew this minhag. And if you heard from the Rebbe minhag, of course you were very particular. But the Rebbe watched the Friedrich Rebbe, and he wrote down the customs in everything. The daily customs, the weekly customs, the yearly customs. I have to tell you, Shia Munchen al Shalom made 2 krachim called Eitzim and Hagi Chabad. One is on Tishrei, one is on this near Sivan. I sent an email to one of his sons. Did your father make Minhagim on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos? He has Minhagim on Pesach, Minhagim on Sukkot. What about every day? Et nie gemacht, hat nicht. The Rebbe watched the Friedrich Rebbe wrote on the Minhagim, and he kept it. When the Rebbe made Hayom Yom, the Rebbe spoke about this in public. I'm not saying anything which people don't know. The Rebbe made the Hayom Yom. The Hayom Yom was commissioned by the previous Rebbe. It was the Friedrich Rebbe's idea. And the Rebbe spent 3 months compiling the entries. And then he put in the shiurim, as we all see. I don't know if you've seen the manuscripts. The Rebbe used to write Yom Rishon, Yud Aleph Shvat, Hey Tov Shin Gimel. Shurim Chumash, and he wrote Pashas Yisrei, Rishon Tisheni. Tilim, Kapitel, Samach, till whatever it is, Samach Hey. Tanya, he left an empty space. And the Friedrich Rebbe writes in B'Ksav Yad Kochoi, the Chitas. I asked Michal Zelix and he told me it disappeared. And it's very upsetting to me. They had the Ksav Yad Kodesh of the Hayom Yom. Michal told me they lost it. I don't know how you lose such a thing. They had the handwritten Hayom Yom. The rule, if you wanted to publish a Sefer, you went to Schlesinger or whoever the publishers were, you had to give a typed text to the publisher. They didn't want to work with handwritings. But the Rebbe's handwriting was so clear that the publishers would print from the Rebbe's Ksav, the Rebbe's handwriting. So the Rebbe wrote the entire Hayom Yom. He wrote it out each day, from Yotas Kislev, beginning with the letter on top of the page, and then the entry of Yotas Kislev, and so on. Shiurim, Chumash, he wrote in the Shir. Tilim, Tanya, and then you see the Friedrich Rebbe's hand. If you have the newer Hayom Yom, you look at the back, they have a few pages where you could see the Rebbe's handwriting and the Chitas, the Tanya, the Friedrich Rebbe wrote it himself. On the last page, Chai Kislev, which is the last day of the Chassidish year, to the Rebbe wrote in the Chitas, the Chiach, until the end, whatever, Chulu, like the Rebbe spoke many times. And underneath the Friedrich Rebbe wrote, you could see it in the printed Ayams, Gut Yom Tiv, Lashon Teva, Limud HaChasidus, Ubedaka HaChasidus, Lashon Rabbi, Tekaseva V'Seicha Seimu. The Rebbe made that Yom Yom. So the Rebbe said to the Friedrich Rebbe, he said about Farbrengen, I wrote down the Minhagim. Can I be mefarsim the Minhagim? The Rebbe said to the Friedrich Rebbe, I wrote down all Minhagi Chabad. I watched you, and I wrote down the Minhagim. Can I publish them? And the Friedrich Rebbe allowed him to do it. Nishna das. Lamashal, the minig of 4-part film. The minig of 4 pairs of film, which is not a minig of Shaykh Rabbi, because the Rebbe said that to put on 4 pairs of film, you have to have a guf naki b'yeser. There's people, machos, is not finished. It's all you in the life, to machen wir 4-part film. Was? Der Rebbe hat allein gesagt. Da war Guf noch bei Jesus. Der hat allein gesagt, ich was allein nicht getan, Zeiten der Rebbe, der hat mir gesagt, you know that in the Rebbe is a Shemus. There's a discussion between the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe about some issue. Could be about this, I forgot what it was about. And the Rebbe says to the Frierdiker Rebbe, he writes it himself. Famir is das an Indian. The Rebbe says to the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Rebbe writes these words himself. Is this an Indian for me? And the Frierdiker Rebbe says to the Rebbe, Fadir is alles an Indian. It's all your business. In other words, don't be humble. Fadir, if there's a chumrah, if there's a mitzvah, if there's a har madrege, there's nothing which is out of your league. Fadir, it's gedruckt. The Rebbe wrote it down. The Frierdiker Rebbe told the Rebbe, Fadir is alles, or the yed is achaninyan. But the Rebbe said that he wasn't going to put on fair periods of film until Frierdiker Rebbe commissioned the film. He bought his film for him. And the Rebbe wore 4 periods of film. And the Rebbe printed the Minhagim. The Frierdiker Rebbe let it print even Minhagim, which are not shaykhs, let happen. The meaning of 4 periods of film is for Yechidei Skula, it's for special people. The Rebbe printed it. Yisrael Gordon al Vashalom, here I go with my Muzgir again. Yisrael Gordon al Vashalom tells the story that the Rebbe arrived on a Monday, you know that. The Rebbe arrived on a Monday, Chav Chesivin Tavshin Aleph, right? Everybody knows that. So if Monday was Chav Chesivin, Wednesday and Thursday was Rosh Chodesh. Wednesday was Lamed Sivan, and Thursday was Aleph Tammuz. Rosh Chodesh, you take off it film between Shachas and Musaf. So the Rebbe came to Shul. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin lived in his office. You know that. When the Rebbe came to America for 3 weeks, they lived in 770, and then they took an apartment. So the Rebbe put the film on in his room. But he came to Shul with the 1,000 film, and between Shachas and Musaf, the Rebbe changed. But the Rebbe was putting on 4 periods of film, so the Rebbe had to work very fast. You know, it says in the Minhagim, you take out the Shirosh of Rashi, and you put on the Shibush Rabbi.
Say this and this and this and this. And
right, you have to sit to learn Pesha Chumash, Pesha, whatever you have to do. And the Bach never saw such a thing.
He did it in front of everybody.
He did it in Shul. Now, the Rebbe did it 1,000 times in Poland.
Yeah.
But the Polish hell, if you're still here, Hamgat Seichel, not to stand over his head. The Amerikaner, Ufgekleppte Große Chassidim, they wanted to see what he's doing. That was the last time the Rebbe did it in public. In Poland, the Rebbe did it Bekviyas. Why? If you wanted to watch, you watched from behind the wall. They had Seichel. The Amerikaner, they didn't understand.
In your face.
They were mamish in his face. So the next month he did it in his room. Dat ik weet David Shifrin. I heard from Yisrael Gordon myself. Yisrael Gordon was all of 10, 9 or 10. David Shifrin was the chassid of the Rebbe Marash. He was an old man. He died in 43, Tavshin Gimel. He's buried in Staten Island in the old Chabad, Chelka Gutz Chabad. He also watched the Rebbe. And they took off the Shalosh of Rashi, put in the Shalosh of Shmush Rebbe. Then they took off the Rashi, still put it in Tamtfil. Then they took off the Shalosh of Rebbe Tam, put in the Shmush Rebbe of Raibid, the Shmush Rebbe of Tam, they call it. And the Rebbe did it very quickly, very unassumingly, still at hate. Like the Rebbe was very tzanua. And the Bachrim were watching the Rebbe. And the David Shifrin was watching. The Bachrim were kids, American boys. The David Shifrin saw the Rebbe Marash. Think about it. The Marash passed away in 1883. You're talking now, 1941. How many years is it? 60 years. He was an old man, the David Shifrin. And he watched, and he watched, and he watched, and he watched, and he watched. And he turned around. I'm sorry, I keep hitting you. He says, Kinderlach, das ist the emes eschere. He turned around and he said to the American boys, children, this is the real deal. Kinderlach. He watched the Rebbe take up the film, put on the film. It was done so tzanua. It was so modest. And he watched and he watched and he watched and he watched. Yisrael Gordon was there. And he would repeat the story. Kinderlach. This is it. Das ist the emes eschere. This is a real chas, the Rebbe. Anyway, but the Rebbe was very makbid about the Minhagim. He wrote the Minhagim down. And the Frierdiker Rebbe gave him permission to publish them in the Yom Yom. Years later, the Maimorim, the Kuntesim came out, and in every Kuntres the Rebbe printed Minhagim. In the Kuntres of Purim, he printed Minhagim Purim. In the Kuntres of Pesach, Minhagim Pesach. In the Kuntres of Tishrei, Minhagim Tishrei. The Sefer HaMinhagim is 98% the Rebbe. It says that Label Groner and Menachem Greenglass. So I'm looking at it. There was all the Rebbe. The Rebbe did it all himself. The Rebbe wrote down the Minhagim. And then they printed the Sefer HaMinhagim. I don't know if you know. Say, Gewen Ayid against the Battle Rifkin. Mesha the Battle Rifkin. I don't know, Wim of da verstehen the Meise. He was invited to the Tish upstairs by Rebbeson, by the Alter Rebbeson. So he tells the Rebbe once, in one of the Sudas, that the Rebbe printed Sefer HaMinhagim, but there's a lot of Minhagim that are missing. And he gave the Rebbe a dogma of a minig that's missing. That the Rebbe Rashab, by Kaveh, before Aleinu, would take his talis off his head. Would lower his talis, you could see his yarmulke. And the Bachrim knew, it's been a Kabbalah, that if you look at the Rebbe, when he takes the talis off his head, it's a tikkun for Chatas Nurim. So Rabbi Rivkin tells the Rebbe that he has to, there's Minhagim missing. The Rebbe never took his talis off his head. Now, I assume, I don't think he was a big tippish. I assume he was asking the Rebbe the question, not because he wanted the Sefer HaMinhagim to be amended, but because he wanted the Rebbe to do the same thing. In Lubavitch, the Bacharim knew that by Kaveh, the Rebbe took his talis off his head, and the Bacharim would look at the Rebbe and say, take a hofen in the minyan. So Rabbi Rivkin was like sort of helping the Rebbe do his job, in case he didn't know. In case the Rebbe didn't know. The Rebbe knew exactly what went on in Lubavitch. And the Rebbe didn't do it because he didn't want to do it. And you're not going to make him do it because you're going to give him inspiration, So he says to the Rebbe, maybe they should print a second Krach of Sefer HaMinhagim, and they should include this minig, that by Kaveh you take your talis off your head, and the Bacham should look at the Rebbe. So the Rebbe says to him, let people be careful about the Minhagim that I published. We'll talk about a Krach Sheni at a later date. But the Rebbe, you have to understand generations. And you have to understand the Rebbes. It's a funny thing, but the Rebbeim react to us. In Lubavitch, it was like this. The Rebbe took his talis off his head once a year. Motzei Yom Kippur. He would take his talis off his head very deliberately, and he'd put it on his hat. But the Rebbe did it every Shabbos. The Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe didn't do it. Finished. That's it. You can explain it any way you wish.
The ticket was over.
Whatever. Interpret it. But Rabbi Rivkin was pushing, He was trying to help the Rebbe, teach him, I don't think he was such a fool that he's going to help. He wanted the Rebbe to do it. And the Rebbe wasn't going to do it. It's very simple. So he told the Rebbe, this minig is missing in the Sefer HaMinhagim, that by Kav you take a talis off your head. So the Rebbe tells him, let him do what I have. When they finish with this, I'll make a volume 2, a Krach Sheni. The Rebbe was very particular about Minhagim. And I heard a tape recently, many times, things happened in 770. I just heard a tape from Label Shapiro, the Langislin from Florida. Rabbi Label Shapiro made hundreds of recordings where he describes individual events that happened. He's in yeshiva. They're so important. And there's so many of them. Rabbi Label Shapiro was Mezaka Nash. He's not the only one. In Montreal, Yossi Minkush did it. But Label has hundreds. Rabbi Label Shapiro. Of Minhagim Pashat. So they recently were mefarsem a little clip where a man got shlishi, got an aliyah. And after his aliyah, he said goimel before Kaddish. Now, as soon as the last aliyah happens, you're supposed to say Kaddish. If you say goimel, you're supposed to wait till after Kaddish. The Rebbe found himself between a rock and a hard place. Why? On the one hand, I'm not in charge of his shoulders, a gabbai. On the other hand, if something happens in front of him, they're going to blame it on him. So by a Farbrengen, the Rebbe brought up the topic. He said, listen, the Rebbe Rashab said, the previous Rebbe's father said that the Rabbeim did not get involved in the Gabos. In other words, the custom in the Lubavitcher shul is not necessarily the Lubavitcher custom, because the Rabbeim did not tell people what to do. But I am dealing, the Rebbe said, with the fact that whatever happened in 770, people are going to assume that I support it, so I need to announce that when the last Aliyah finishes, first you say Kaddish, and the Rebbe said some very sharp things. That everybody is a Gabbai, and everybody's an expert, everybody does whatever they want. The Rebbe really, it's always gemusert. The poor guy, I don't know who he was, but you listen to the tape, it's so critical. I mean, they streng. You're in a shul. You want to say Goimel. Don't say Goimel, ask permission. Don't just stand up there and make Goimel. And the Rebbe protested. Because the Rebbe wanted that we should know the Minhagim exactly. We should know what is the Minhag Chabad. They put a lot of time and effort into it. We should know the Minhagim. And I don't know what I'm allowed to say. A younger man told me a mice. A young man who was here tonight. Gimel Tammuz, Tov Shin and Dal was Shabbos. Either Monday or Tuesday night, after Gimel Tammuz, says Medaisik Yartzik. He had a dream. He was a fresh Baal Tshuva. And he sees the Rebbe. And in his dream, the Rebbe says to him, it's the middle of summer. It's Gimel Tammuz. That it's very important to be particular about Shruya. Pesach, you shouldn't soak the matzah in water. Him and his wife were not careful about Shruya. He laughs, he tells me, the next year and in this dream, the Rebbe says to him, it's very important to be careful about Shruya. And then the Rebbe says to him, also, when you say Tehillim, it's very important to pronounce the words correctly. And in the dream, he sees the Rebbe's holy hand, and he's showing him in the Tehillim that when you say a word and there's a nun at the end, you have to pronounce the nun clearly. You have to say every word very clearly. And then the Rebbe says to him, I gotta go. He says, wait, I need a bracha. And he puts his hand out. And the Rebbe touches his hand. I just heard the story from him tonight. He says, a second later, I was wide awake. You're talking Tzvei Drei Tag, Noch Gimel Tammuz, Tov Shin Nun Dal. He said, I was wide awake. I was so up. I said, oh my God, I have to write. He sat down right away, he wrote it down, he would have forgotten it. Now, what does this mean? A guy is from a few years, and the Rebbe is talking about Gebroks, of all things, really, that's the most important thing. Gebroks, Tillim. So we've talked about this a few times. The point is that there's a precise way to do everything. Everything has a precise way. There are little things, the little things. Chabad has, we're very lucky, you should know. If you go outside of Chabad, you don't realize how confused people are. We know exactly how to do each thing. Most of them, the Rebbe Poshet wrote down, and the few that the Rebbe didn't write down, we watched how the Rebbe did it himself. Now there's always going to be customs that you can question. So what is the Chabad? There's still things that we're not sure about. But there are so many things that the Rebbe clarified. And they're little details. They're tiny, in Yiddish, Einzelheiten, little tiny nuances. And the Vart is, Rabbi said, the Vart is, of course, I mean, you can't tell the Rebbe why he did, what it means. But at a Farbrengen, you can say it also means, the reality of life is as follows. If a person worries about little things, he'll never have to worry about the big things. If you raise your children, and you raise yourself, and nuance, the Tils Yadayim, Birchsa Shachar, Zman Krishme, you mentioned the beginning of Farbrengen before you got here, that the Rebbe told him Shvat, his yard, this is Test Shvat, that Mistame you'll be Maveh Seder on Friday. At least you'll start. Don't wait for Shabbos. The Rebbe told him in Yechidus. So he says, what I do on a normal week, I'm not going to tell you. But Yud Shvat, if it's Shabbos, I'm Maveh Seder on Friday. If we sensitize ourselves in our own lives, and we raise our children, we teach our children, the nuances, the little things, we'll never have to worry about the big things. That's one of the simple, valuable benefits of being particular about Minhagim. I teach kids, I teach boys, I teach girls, I teach men, I teach women. And I always tell the kids, I tell the mothers, your friend has a can of soda or a bag of chips. I don't know about the girls, but the boys are very happy to take from somebody else, you know. So your friend has a can, give me a sip. So you grab the can and you give a zhlok. Did you make a shakal dibidvari? Oh, I forgot. The guy's got a bag of chips. You put your hand in and take a few chips. Excuse me, don't take my whole bag. Okay, I'll just take 6. Yeah. Did you make a bed priyadama? Oh, I forgot. Those tiny things, those little things. In the olden days, they used to call it Yiras Shamayim. Pashut, being precise. Amol God, Amol, they didn't even speak about Yiras Shamayim. They spoke about an El Cherid. An El Cherid, this was the expression. An earnest Jew. If you were an El Cherid, you were careful, you were the way you're supposed to be. Now there's 101 titles, and those 101 titles don't add up to the El Cherid. But if a person is particular about little things, it creates a framework where, of course, the big things we're going to be careful. In other words, when you talk about the fact, if you study those years, the 40s, the Rebbe wasn't yet the Rebbe, and he dedicated so much time and so much effort to clarify precisely what our custom is. The Chevra came from Russia. Reb Nachum Abkovsky, who was a Yiras Shamayim Rabbim, and others, Rabbi Salneach. They wanted to know how you're supposed to do this. They couldn't write to the Frierdiker Rebbe, they wrote to the Rebbe or to the Lamash. And the Rebbe would answer them. Either he would answer them. He said, I went into the Rebbe the Shver, I went to the Frierdiker Rebbe told me this is what we do. Or on other occasions, the Rebbe would clarify the meaning himself. But the Rebbe spent so much time and effort with these light, teeny. I remember as a bocher, the Rebbe just happened 1,000 times. Where the Rebbe asked the Pashat Shaila, on Aseres Yemei Tshuva, when you finish Menesra, you say Eisa HaShalom, yeah? When you bench, do you say Eisa Shalom, Eisa HaShalom? The Rebbe asked the question of Farbrengen. And the Rebbe said, Ich mei rein zum Shver. I went into the Frierdiker Rebbe and I asked him, when you bench and Aseres Yemei Tshuva, you say Eisa Shalom, Eisa HaShalom. And the Rebbe said, Ich get a leaf from Rebbe. The Rebbe hat trach getan, the Frierdiker Rebbe thought for a moment. Das sagen wir steht in Siddur. That was the answer. So the way it's written in Siddur, and in Siddur it says, Eisa Shalom, Eisa Shalom. Now why over here, Eisa HaShalom, Eisa Shalom? Eat your heart out. But the Rebbe spent so much time on this. The Rebbe spent so much time on this. And again, the Rebbe spent time because we have to know. And again, if you know the history of Chassidus, the Rebbe Rashab like sagen, ich hab nicht halten me macht mir noch. The Rebbe Rashab didn't like that Chassidim imitated him. The Rebbe Rashab had Minhagim, and if you imitate the Rebbe Rashab said, who asked you to do this? This famous story with the Netilas Yadayim. And everybody washed their hands twice. The Rebbe Rashab washed his hands 3 times, and he used to use a towel. There was actually a story where somebody asked the Rebbe Rashab why he does it, and the Rebbe Rashab said, I don't remember, but if I do it, there's a mucker. Because when I was 12 years old, I trained my goof that it should instinctively do like it's written in Shulchan Aruch, Allah Yeshemim. And then later, they have it na Yem with the Rebbe Rashab. In Agos HaShrib, when you get to Truma, it's a Agor in the Rosh, that when you say Truma, you're supposed to wash 3 times, and there's a mucker for it. So the Rebbe Rashab washed 3 times. So there were 2 Chassidim who watched the Rebbe Rashab watch 3 times. One of them was a simple Jew, didn't know much. The Rebbe washes 3 times. The Rebbe didn't say a word to him. There was another chassid there who was Abal Madrege, who was on a Pnimisdik chassid, and he washed 3 times. And the Rebbe Rashab turns around to him and says, "Ver zogt adu halspadem." The simple Jew, the Rebbe didn't say a word. The fancy schmancy, the Rebbe says, "Who says you're ready for this?" There's a moidendik amaisa. There's a moidendik amaisa which is now printed. There's a book about Leizer Nanas. There was a chassid in Rosh named Leizer Nanas. The Olam online lost me, so I'm going to keep talking, but I'm going to put on a battery so that they could watch me. Leizer Nanas was a Tamim. If anybody wants my card, I have a few cards. Leizer Nanis was a Tomim. He learned in Lubavitch. And he was asked by the Rebbe to write an autobiography in the 70s. Leizer Nanis was 20 years in the gulags. When he came from Russia, the Rebbe told him, our Rebbe told him, that the 20 years in the gulags are not counted. He lived 99 years. He was Ma'arech Yomim. And he never had any children. You know why he had no children? Because in the years that he could have had children, he was fashikt. His wife was also Ma'arech Yomim. I mean, I don't know how long, but she was also Ma'arech Yomim. So Leizer Nanis wrote a book. It came out in the 70s. It was called Subot. It was written in Yiddish. I have it. And he uses the pseudonym Avram Netzach. The book is powerful. And the cover is a bitter Zalman Kleiman. Zalman Kleiman could get dark. Ooh, he could get dark. Maybe even more than Handel. Zalman Kleiman could get dark. So he has a picture, a painting of a man, a Yid Dabord, standing holding onto barbed wire, screaming, Ratavet, save me. And he published this book. And anonymously, without a name, without a real name. After Gimel Tammuz, the situation in the Soviet Union completely changed. So first of all, he translated from Yiddish into Hebrew. And second of all, he added many supplements, many additional things. And it came out in 2 volumes called Ha'ish Shaloi Nichna. It was made, he never had any children, but he had an adopted son. People helped him. They're a wonderful read. Wonderful read. The man who would not submit. Ha'ish Shaloi Nichna. And there's things in that volume that are mamish, upsetting. One of the things in that volume is that his father was hard of hearing. His father Rabbi. Rabbi Leizer Nanis was born in the colonies. He was born in the colonies in Kherson that the Mittler Rebbe had established, which means they were Lubavitch Chassidim Datis, generations. In Lubavitch there was a yeshiva, Temchet Mimim. So his father brought him to the Rebbe Rashab. His father brought him to the Rebbe Rashab as a boy. He went into Yechidus together with Rebbe Rashab to be accepted into the yeshiva in Lubavitch. And in that first Yechidus, the Rebbe spoke to his father. And at some point, the Rebbe Rashab turns to him and he starts to whisper. Because the Rebbe Rashab knew that his father was hard of hearing and he won't be able to hear the whisper. And the Rebbe tells him, Du vazayin bazeh in the hand in the vestareski. You will be in their hands, but you'll survive. When they walked out of Yechidus, his father said, what did the Rebbe say that I didn't hear? And he understood that the Rebbe did not want his father to know. Anyway, this is one story. Another story, which is mamish a gewaldige chassidische Maise. It was in Rostov. I mean, I don't know if you know the story, that the Rebbe Rashab sent him on a shlichus, this Leizer Nanis on a shlichus. Chveis was 1917, 1918, 1919. In those years, there was a minhag in Russia. That if you had a Jew on the train, you would wait for the train to go down a mountain, you would open the door and throw the Jew out, and like the Chazal say about the Azazel, they would watch the person become dismembered. The Achzorius, the anti-Semitism. So Leizer Nanis was sent by the Rebbe Nishma Seidin on a shlichus from Rostov. He was pushed, afraid for his life. He made a God. But the Rebbe sent him on a shlichus. So he went into the Rebbe before he left. And he told the Rebbe, Rashab, I'm afraid. And the Rebbe says, why are you afraid? So he tells the Rebbe, I'm traveling myself, and it was known that they would literally throw Jews off the moving trains. They would kill them. And the Rebbe says, a Jew never travels alone. Wherever he travels, God travels with him. Train. So he goes. He's sitting on the train, and a bunch of Roshas are talking about him in front of him. And they're saying, let's wait till it's going down the mountain. Then we'll take this Yid. Imagine listening to your own death sentence, and you're helpless. We'll take this Yid, we'll open up the door, and we'll throw his body, and we'll watch him become a Soil Azos. Und sitzt dort und treiselt, they're going to kill him. Aber der Rebbe hat ihm gesagt, a Yid came nicht allein, that Jew is never alone, Hashem is traveling with him. And as they get to the top of the mountain, in other words, they're about to go over to the other side, and the train is going to pick up speed, an alter goy gets charupov, an old Russian says, we hate Trotsky, who was a Yid. He hates Trotsky, because he was a from a Yid. The enemy, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So the goyim thought about it, and they paskin that this guy did not throwing off the train. So he saw b'muchash, ad Yid fart nicht allein. But the story that I wanted to share is this. It's a chassidische ma'asetake. There was a time in Rostov that there was no maskir. I don't know if it was one day. There was nobody to be machnas into Yechidus. There was nobody to stand by the door of Yechidus. Like Rabbi Grona stood by the door. Rabbi Lezer Naz was an elder Bacher, a Tamim. So I don't know who said to Lezer, tonight people are going into Yechidus. No, someone needs to stand by the door to keep it moving and so on. The official people are not here. Tonight is your job. Stand by the door, and as Chassidim go in and out, you should move it along. Fine. Amongst the people going into Yechidus was a Bishop the Masmid. The Bishop the Masmid was a gon and a chassid. So when Rabbi Itcher went into the Rebbe Rashab, Lezer Nanis made sure that the door didn't close, so he could hear. It's a big chutzpah. A chassid goes into Yechidus and you're listening in. He made sure that the door was ajar, or just an inch, so he could hear the conversation. The Bishop of the Masmid was Achmeni, the Bishop of the Masmid. There's a sikh in Tafir Tzadik Test where the Fidik ever calls him a chassid, a tzaddik, a Rabbi Yitzchak, the Bishop of the Masmid. So each of the Masmid walks into the Rebbe Rashab, and Lezer Nanas is standing outside listening, and he starts to cry. The Bishop of the Masmid. What's he crying about? He says to the Rebbe Rashab, I took on a new chumrah. I took on a new strictness. But I didn't ask the Rebbe. Chassidim Amol, even big Chassidim, if you wanted to become more religious, you had to get permission. You didn't just do it. You went into the Rebbe. And the Bishop of the Masmid, normally when he took on a hidden mitzvah, he would go to the Rebbe Rashab, he would ask him, and the Rebbe would either okay it or video it. So he says to the Rebbe Shmaseiden, I didn't ask. And I'm thinking that maybe I overstepped my level. And he's crying. And he tells the Rebbe a story. Now, Bashgacha Pratis, Rebbe Lezer Nanas knew the story because he witnessed it. What was the story? The Bishop of the Masmid came to the colonies. He came to the Kherson. And he stayed in the Nanas house, in Lezer Nanas' parents' home. And Lezer Nanas was there. Well, first of all, what was the chumrah that he took on? What was the hidden mitzvah? That he would not eat, flesh he never ate, meat he never ate. You're talking about chicken. He would not eat chicken unless he checked chalif before and after the shechita. So that's our chumrah. So the Bishop of the Masmid took on this chumrah that he would not eat chicken unless he checked the chalif before the shechita and after the shechita. So he was in the Kherson, and Mrs. Nanas has to prepare food for him. My meramuz, here I go with the parentheses. I heard this also from Rabbi Fuchs, that the Bishop of the Masmid did not have a house. He lived out of a suitcase. And Gevana Alman, the phrase gestorben, his youngest son Mulle, sagt sagen, The tat is in Himmel, and the mom is there. From the red, it was Vilma for me. My father's in heaven, my mother's in the ground. His wife passed away young. He never remarried. He lived in a chemedan. He had a suitcase full of svarim. And wherever he traveled, this is where he lived. If I come in jeden Jahr, Elul in Atvatsk, Rabbi Fuchs told me, Rabbi Fuchs told me, the Bishop Master came to Atvatsk. The yeshiva rented a hotel with many rooms. And all the guests who came for Yom Tif were given a room. I don't know if they paid or they didn't pay, but the Bishop Master, he was a Shadari. And he got Kaleb, the ganze Leben when the Rebbe. But Tishrei at Elul, he was in Atvatsk. Rabbi Fuchs told me, Jede Nacht hat verbracht. Every night, Elul. One night with Bachrim, one night with Bachrim. And the words Rabbi Fuchs told me, Efek trinken mashke v'yafish. There's a sikha where the Rebbe says, quote, Zu viel at the nigedaft. The two stories are not contradictory. It's a perspective. Rabbi Fuchs told me, Egetrunken mashke v'yafish. And the Rebbe said, Zu viel at the nigedaft. The Rebbe told the story in a word that he said once, Friedrich Rebbe. He would bring it every night. When the Farbrengen was finished, he would lay down for half an hour. A halbe Stunde. He drunk on Hashem. He was a Ishel. A great chassid. So, Erev Rosh Hashanah, Reb Chache, who was the maskir of the Rebbe, calls over Rabbi Fuchs. He says, go to my house, and my wife will give you the food for Reb Itche for the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Now, to cook for Reb Itche was impossible. First of all, he carried his own pots. If you wanted to cook for him, he came to your house, you were not kosher. You had to cook in his pots. It was on my son. To please Reb Itche the Masman, it was impossible. I want you to know, I started the Farbrengen with a story with my grandmother, father, and the Rebbe. When my parents got married, the Lubavitchers were saying, Vu kum zi to Lubavitch. So the first story was the one I told you. Rabbi Itche the Masmid would come to the Rockaways and sleep in my grandmother's bed. 3 weeks every summer. My grandparents lived in the Rock. My great-grandparents, Sofa, lived in the Rockaways. They went Elche Yidden. Everybody was angestanden. I don't know what he ate in their house. My grandmother told me I had a bedroom. Rabbi Itche the Masmid used my room. And it wasn't fair because I didn't have a place to sleep. He never, ever, ever used the bed. He spent 3 weeks in my grandmother's bed. So this is a connection. It's interesting. This is my mother's family. We're not Lubavitchers at all. So Reb Chache sent Rabbi Fuchs to his wife, who had a house. They lived in a house, to get food for Rabbi Itche the Masmid. So he knocks on the door. He walks in. It's Leil Rosh Hashanah. It's not Rosh Hashanah. And he says to Mrs. Fagin, the wife of Reb Chache, Fagin, that I was sent to get the food from Reb Chache for Rabbi Itche the Masmid. Anyway, she comes back up with a rickety pot, a rickety pot, and in the pot is tzimis, potatoes with sweet potatoes and honey, nothing. And she puts it on this Rabbi Itche, and she leaves. Rabbi Fuchs is thinking, what about the chicken? And what about the kugel? And what about the chveisvas, the Minhagim? So he's figuring that she went back into the kitchen to get more food. And she's not coming back. He's waiting and he's waiting and he's waiting. Anyway, she walks out. What are you doing here? I'm waiting for the rest of the food. And she tells him, that's it. That's all he's got. A little tzimis. No milchiks, no fish, no flesh, no a little tzimis. So he says to Mrs. Fagin, this is for 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. She says, trust me, he's not going to eat this either. But the bitch of the Masmid. Rabbi Fuchs. These stories I heard from him. They're worth repeating. Anyway, so Rabbi Itche the Masmid walks into the Rebbe Hashab and he starts to cry. He said, I took upon myself, I hear the mitzvah that I don't eat chicken if I don't check the chalaf before and check the chalaf after. I was in the colonies. He's telling us to the Rebbe Hashab. And I stayed in the home of Reb Nanis, and Reb Leizer Nanis was home. He remembered that. He was there. In other words, he was a witness to both halves of the story. That Mrs. Nanis said to Rabbi Itche the Masmid, if I'm going to prepare food for you, are you going to eat? So he makes all of his rules. You have to cook in my pots. And the sheikhet has to come to me first. I'll check the chalif. He'll shech the chicken. I'll shech the chalaf again. If you'll make it kosher, I'll eat. So she gets the sheikh to come to the house. The bitch of the masman checks the chalaf. The sheikh checks. He checks the chalaf again. She was an elach yidina. She kashed the chicken, and he had what to eat Shabbos. He davened the ganzen Tag. He davened all day long. He came home to daven to eat breakfast, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And Mrs. Nanes puts down for him the cholent, whatever he prepared for him. That was his. It was kosher enough for him. With his own pots and his own shchita. And the bitch of the Masmid says, Shabbos darf messen kugel. The Rebbe said once in the Farbrengen, as a da zelcha vazogen, the Alte Rebbe gesagt, the Shabbos darf, but the Rebbe said it. He didn't say that the Alte Rebbe said it, but the Sach zogen, the Alte Rebbe said, Shabbos darf messen kugel. Friday night, you have to eat Shabbos. When you make a fancy schmancy dinner and you serve Chinese food, you have to have kugel. Friday night, you have to have kugel. So minik Chabad. Shabbos day, you have to have kugel. Shalashudis, I don't know what you eat. So the bitch of the Masman says, what's mit kugel? I didn't say gefilte fish, I said kugel. 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 So Mrs. Nanis goes, and she brings a piece of kugel for the bitch of the Masman. The bitch of the Masman would not eat food which was 100% kosher. He was margish. The Gemara says, there's a taisvis. And Hashem protects tzaddikim from doing Avedis. So it's more than one place. The Chas Taisa says it means specifically midid achila. Other Avedis are tzaddik can be do by mistake, a kisholin by mistake. But the Eibishter protects tzaddikim when it comes to food. The bitch of the Masmid knew if the food was kosher but it wasn't to his standards, he wouldn't eat it. So I say in Rusland, he washed for bread. And there were 2 bakers. One baker the Bishop of the Masmid used. Listen, Chaykel Khan tells the story. And the other, it's in his book, and the other bakery didn't use. And after washing, he started to know which bakery is it from. So they lied to him. And they told him that it's from the bakery that he eats. And it wasn't. And he didn't eat the bread. It was a pachal, until he wouldn't eat the bread. You couldn't play games. It was the real deal. So they bring in the kugel, and this kugel sitting on the plate. And before the bitch takes a bite, he turns to Mrs. Nan and says, "Did you put schmaltz in the kugel?" Of course. Is it from my chicken that was shechted after I just? Ooh, I didn't have enough schmaltz. I took the schmaltz from a different chicken. So that was it. There's no kugel Shabbos. As they're sitting there, the Rav of that shtetl shows up. The bitch of the Masmid was about 35. The Rav was B'sama ben Shivim. He was an older Rav, a very choshev Rav, a big lamdan, a big chosid. He came in to be mevakir, to visit the bitch of the Masmid. And he's sitting there with this whole conversation is taking place. Now Leza Nanas watched this also. That she puts down kugel, and he's not eating it. And finally he asks Mrs. Nanas, "You put schmaltz in the kugel?" She says, "Of course." "From my chicken?" "Ooh, I didn't have enough schmaltz." So he's not eating it. So the old Rav says, "Veis ich nicht gehad ka kugel." I did not eat kugel today. It's a minhag to eat kugel. If you're not going to eat it, I'm going to eat it. So Bishop Aspet says, as they say in Ingar and Zeyer and Gesundheit. So this old chassid ate the kugel because it wasn't religious enough for the Bishop of Aspet. This is the first half of the story. 6 months later, he's by the Rebbe Rashab in Hastov, and he tells him the whole story. He says, an old Baba Charov can eat this, and I can't. Maybe I bit off more than I can chew. And he's pushed crying. And Leza Nanas has the door open ajar so he can hear the Yechidus. And the Bishop of the Masmid says, whenever I take on a Hiddur mitzvah, I ask the Rebbe permission. I didn't ask. Maybe I made a mistake. And the Rebbe Rashab says, Nein itche. Fadir is alas aninyan, the same lotion. No itche, it's good. But he can't accept the Rebbe's words. So the Rebbe has to say it a few times, Nein itche. So Leza Nanas got to see both halves of the story. the point of the story was, Chassidim were Yirei Shamayim. But when they took on a higher standard, I know a Jew, I found out by mistake. When I approached him about it, I got very upset how I know. I know a shliach who wears 4 pairs of tefillin. One of his relatives told it to me, Masiach Levitume. But you tell me something, I'm going to go right to the source. So I was shocked. Because this guy's bechlal not a you, a person. He's not one of those people who wants to be holy. For him to put a port for the film, the Rebbe had to bamish. He doesn't need to be better than everybody else. He's not that. He's very humble. So the next time I saw him, I said, I heard that you put on 4 pairs of film. He turns white like a ghost. How do you know? So I couldn't tell him. I didn't want to make trouble with the other guy. So whatever, I know. See, very earnest. He says, I felt like I was a shliach. I felt like I was struggling with something. And I needed more zehirus, I needed more shmira, I needed more guarding. So I asked the Rebbe if I could put on purpose film, and the Rebbe allowed me. But he was very unhappy that I knew. But he didn't do it by himself. He felt that he needs a shmira, an extra protection, because he was out in the boondocks. Says I wrote to the Rebbe, to in detail. He was not happy that I knew, but when I asked him, he explained it to me. I told him. Ich bin a typisch, aber nicht a aggressive typisch. Wait 10 minutes, wait a few minutes.
Give him another chayim.
Yeah. The word is azoi. You should. The reason I'm having this conversation, the reason I want to bring about this is because Chassidim were very precise. Chassidim are very precise in everything. If you're precise in minhag, you're for sure precise in halacha. And the fact of life is that when we're precise about the little things, I told you the example that I tell the kids. When you take a candy out of your friend's bag, one candy, what are they called? Twizzler. No, the Twizzlers are big. An M&M or whatever it is. Make a bracha. If a person develops a sensitivity to small and yonim of Yirei Shamayim, a bracha rishon is a very good example, but there's a ribuy examples. Bracha achreino. If a person is particular about little things, he'll never have a problem with big things. And it's true for yourself, and it's true for your children. It's true in Chinuch. And it's an ikir in Lubavitch. The Rebbe dedicated, I can't tell you how much of his time to establish Minhagim Chabad, because he wanted us to know the customs. He wrote them down, he published them, and then he talked about them. Over the years, the Rebbe talked about them in Minhagim, and talked about how important they are, and talked about the precise. And today, this is very important to bring up. It's important to bring up, not because it's good to be a lubab. That's good too. It's important to bring out the idea that you can't worry about the cosmic stuff. You got to worry about the micro. And if you worry about the micro, you won't have to worry about the macro. It's just the way it is. I always give the same example. I'm a citizen of the city of New York. We had 2 mayors successively. One of them was African American, his name was Mayor Dinkins. And after him we had an Italian American whose name was Mayor Giuliani. Both of them ran on a plot. They said what they were going to do. When Dinkins ran for mayor in '88, he said, I'm not going to go after the kid who stands on the street corner and he's selling drugs for $5. And most of them were black. I'm going to go after the people who are pushing the drugs, who are making the serious money, which is all white people, who were the source of the drugs. And that was what he did as a mayor. During the 4 years of his mayoralship, you couldn't walk the streets of Brooklyn. You couldn't walk. It was dangerous. Giuliani came in after him, and he said, I'm going to make quality of life crimes. You can get arrested for making noise, let alone for selling drugs. Now, Dinkins took his position because he was thinking about his constituents. Giuliani took his position, he was thinking about his base, right? But the fact was that when Dinkins was mayor, the city fell. And Giuliani was mayor, the city lifted itself up. It was incredible. Better than it was under Koch, under Beam, under Lindsay. He brought New York back. Why? It's simple. If you want people to live, make the streets safe. And the streets safe doesn't mean you stop murders. You stop graffiti. And if you stop graffiti, there won't be murders. It's just the way it is. You deal with the little things. It's a marshal muchoshes that the kids of Brooklyn all understand because they lived through it when I first started out as a teacher. If you deal with the little things, this is a hira from Lubavitch, from the Rebbe, that every Lubavitcher chassid, we're all different places in Avodas Hashem. And today you have, Baruch Hashem, you have heavyweight and middleweight and lightweight and super middleweight, every kind of chassid. Everyone defines himself by how religious they are. Everybody needs to understand that if you are one of those people who says, leave the kids alone about the little things, as long as they go to school and they behave, you don't have to make them crazy and bother them. Agreisen to us, it's a big mistake. Because if you point out to your children the exactness, the preciseness, the correctness about Kleinigkeiten, about Einzelheiten, you won't have to deal with the big issues. And it's true for us as well. And this is a Hira l'Rabbim, it's a Hira from the Rebbe's Hanhoge. L'chaim, everybody, I want to bless us all. We should have nachas from our children, we should have nachas from ourselves. Yiddish chsidische nachas. And it shouldn't be b'di'evet, it should be lechatchila. Our children should be, listen, it's hard. It's hard. It's good, but it's hard. It's hard, it's true. I'll admit when I was growing up it was easier. We were all so poor. What was our tightness? What? It was easier. Our parents raised us. All we knew was the kids today are living in a different world. They have opportunities. They have access. But we have to raise our children. We have to raise our kids. Our kids are not going to raise themselves. We have to teach our children Negelvasser. We have to teach our children Medani. We have to teach our children Bechaz HaShachar. We have to teach our children Zman Krishma. Shema, saying Shema in time. I always tell the same story. When I was a little kid, my father used to wake us up for Krishma. My brother and I. It was like gesund. He would sing and walk into the bedroom. Shtei tuv, shtei tuv, lavoidaza. We wanted to kill him. Shtei tuv. And as soon as he said Shema, he let us puff till 12 o'clock. But he wanted to say Krishma. But he would tell us a story that happened in his childhood. That they lived in these big houses when they came from Russia. So they went through all the borders, Poland, Czechoslovakia, France. My father was in Vienna, in Austria. So I don't know what's called Sever, Amamar, and See. I heard all these words, I don't know what they mean. But this is a place where people lived. They had these palaces, old palaces that nobody used, with 30, 40, 50 rooms. 30, 40, 50 rooms with 30, 40, 50 families. Every family got a room. Him and his wife were given a room. The Beis HaKisei. Was the only available room. The toilet, this was their bedroom. You understand? So my father was a boy of 10 or 11. He woke, this is before they came to Paris. They were still in Vienna, I think. He comes downstairs, and a Yid in his 60s, one of Rabbi David HaLaker's sons, a Kievman, was sitting on the front steps and crying. He went. Now in those years, for Jews to cry, there was tzaras on Ashir, people were dying like flies. So my father, as of whatever age he was, 9, 10, 11, asks, was weintet? Why is he crying? Et verschlafen Krishma. This Jew was crying because he missed Man Krishma. I've gone through this meditation 100 times. I mean, this is not a joke. I say to my children, to my students, my father witnessed this. I heard it from him. You're hearing it from me. Could you imagine seeing an adult man crying because he missed Man Krishma? Who's ever seen a man cry because he missed Shema Yisrael Adonai? He missed the clock by 5 minutes. You know what kind of impact that has? When my father would talk about it, you could see the impact. He was a child, just came from Russia, who learned how to read Hebrew when he was 8. He didn't exactly grow up in the Cheder. He went to Chveis Vaz, he was in Moscow. But the impact, an old man, Abba Chamishim, is crying. So my father would tell us the story, understand? And it would guilt us gefährlich. I told the story to my kids. It didn't work so good. It's not Hadar. It's the story, it's passed along. But the Yerushalayim, the message was, these things are important. We need to teach this to our children, every father. And it's not, the Rebbe said many times, it's not your kid's fault that you're a hypocrite. You say, I don't want to tell my kids kach v'kach. You know me. It's not your children's fault that you got problems. You have to raise them. One of the most important things that has to be said, Medav Hadav and the kids need to be taught by our parents, by us, the little tiny aspects of Yerushalayim. And then you'll never have a problem with the biggest. It's true, it's mamish emes. And I've been carrying on. But I actually said what I wanted to say. Took a while. Been seeing. How much do I love you? I want to tell you a word, which is unfortunate at this particular juncture. I was a little kid, and my father took us to Farbrengen, brother and I. Always. And if there was too many people, he would put us on his laps. My father would sit 3-4 hours with a boy on this lap and this boy on his lap, and we were playing chicken. We were not easy kids. The Mesiras Nefesh was my father's dedication to us. And when his feet were killing him, he'd put us on the bench until someone complained that we were blocking, and they put us back on his knees. That's how we grew up. And we'll never be able to repay this. We can't even appreciate the Mesiras Nefesh. Every Farbrengen, we sat in father's lap. In those years, the big Farbrengens finished at 3 o'clock in the morning. After Lamed Ches, they finished at 1 o'clock. But the Farbrengens went to 3 in the morning. And my father used to say, this is long. When I was growing up, we went to 5 o'clock in the morning. But the Farbrengens in the 70s went till 3. You remember this, till 3 o'clock in the morning, normal. So we'd fall asleep on my father's lap. And we always wake up at the same point. Ay, 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 ay. The Farbrengen finished with the Alter Rebbe's Nig. Before the Alter Rebbe's Nig, we would wake up and we had saliva all over our mouth and on the bench. You know what it is when you wake up in a funny position and you drooled all over yourself. Ay, ay, ay. Anyway, what's the point? We woke up with Alter Rebbe's Nig. So there's a disease. You make a Farbrengen, you get together 100 people, and when the 6 guys left, we have to take Alter Rebbe's Nig. This is Farbrengen Shvat. The Elm is given the Baruch Hashem. The Elm is gegangen, but there's still a couple of Jews left. So we'll sing the Alter Rebbe's Nig. We're talking about Alter Rebbe's Nig. Yeah, we should have done it. When I Farbrengen more balabatish environment, just a chassidische Farbrengen. So I say the Alter Rebbe's Nig right in the beginning. I say, listen, we're all here. You're going to go to sleep in 15 minutes. Let's see. I do it in the beginning when the Elm is. Tonight I didn't do it. But I did, not bad, Baruch Hashem. And you know the story, the Rebbetzin, the Bachrim were in the house by the Rebbe. And the rule was that when the Rebbe came, you had to leave the house, you had to get out. You were not supposed to be there. But it was not so easy to sneak out, sometimes it was impossible. So the Rebbe walked in, and the Bachrim ran away. And the Rebbe says to the Rebbetzin, Vuleif, and say, the Rebbetzin really didn't like that the Bachrim were afraid of the Rebbe. The Rebbetzin really didn't like. Yeah. Chaim Baruch told me that the Rebbe, the Rebbetzin were doing B'dikas Chametz, and he was in the basement. They did it. They went through the whole house, and he had to get by. And he was so afraid, and the Rebbetzin said to him, beißt nicht. He doesn't. Why are you so afraid of him? He's a nice guy. But the Rebbetzin couldn't understand when the Rebbe would come in. They would go. And the Rebbe walked into the house, and the Bachrim ran. So the Rebbe says, "Who's something gelaufen?" So the Rebbetzin said, "Zaning gelaufen kriegen sie ihre Chosid." They were in shirts, And the Rebbe walked into the house. They ran to get the hat and the jacket. So the Rebbe asked the Rebbe, said, "Where are they running?" So you love him kicking them chassid. So the chassid is the hat and the jacket and the gadol. But talking about the Rebbe, come on, if you want, I'm not going to press you. This is Florida. It's there. You don't tell anybody what to do. But if you want the small things, if you want to get your chassid, this is the time to get your chassid.